Well, what we know is that at this point, there is no active diplomacy with everyone at the same table. We have not yet heard that Russia or Vladimir Putin have accepted that term sheet, which is basically what the U.S. and Ukraine were hammering out, like what Ukraine could accept in terms of concessions. So there's no, as Russia put it, official proposal on the table. I have confirmed as of this morning that indeed next week, Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, is planning to bring the latest proposal to Russia. That's the plan in place. So we'll see if there is any kind of concession made whatsoever by Russia. But as you've seen from attacks, even just overnight, Russia is still very much focused on pressing its advantage on the battlefield. And the Trump administration, as you heard President Trump allude to in that chat on Air Force One earlier, is assessing that Russia could.
You guys, I'm not even kidding when I say what I'm about to tell you is going to blow your mind and completely change how you think about what's happening in the Republican Party right now. We're witnessing the first major GOP revolt against Trump since he got back in office, and it's all because of his absolutely insane Ukraine surrender plan that basically hands Putin everything he's ever wanted on a silver platter. We're talking about a leaked 28-point peace proposal that demands Ukraine give up the Donbass region, cap their military size, and forget about ever joining NATO. And Republican heavyweights like Mitch McConnell and Roger Wicker are losing their minds, calling it a Russian wish list that makes America look weak and pathetic. Can you believe this? The same Republicans who've been defending Trump for years are now openly calling his foreign policy team untrustworthy Russian agents and demanding he fire his envoys because they think his Ukraine plan is so pro-Putin that it's going to destroy the party's credibility forever. The scale and intensity of this Republican rebellion is unlike anything we've seen since Trump returned to power, and it's exposing massive cracks in the GOP coalition that could completely reshape the political landscape heading into the 2026 midterms. So here's what's really going down, and this is where it gets absolutely wild. Trump set a Thanksgiving deadline to get this Ukraine peace deal done, and the leaked details of his 28-point plan are so shocking that even his own senators are calling it disgusting capitulation to Putin. We're talking about a plan that requires Ukraine to permanently cede territory in the Donbass, limit their army to a size that Putin approves of, and abandon any hopes of joining NATO or getting Western security guarantees. Think about that for a second. Trump is literally asking Ukraine to give up the territories that Russia invaded illegally, weaken their military so they can't defend themselves, and abandon the alliance system that's kept Europe peaceful for decades. Come on, this isn't a peace plan. This is a surrender document that gives Putin everything he wanted when he started this war. And the fact that Trump thought he could get away with proposing this without massive political blowback shows you just how completely out of touch he is with what Americans actually want from their foreign policy. The sheer audacity of believing he could force both Ukraine and Russia to accept these terms within a matter of weeks reveals a level of diplomatic arrogance that's stunning, even by Trump's standards. Yeah, like you can just resolve a years-long conflict because you want it done by a holiday weekend. The disconnect from reality is absolutely mind-boggling. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right? Let's get back to the video.
Really just keep going with this war and ultimately win, or at least ultimately seize the eastern part of the country. And so the U.S. is kind of operating from that assumption at this point.
And so, Margaret, from your point of view, what has either shifted or changed in the past week? We went from U.S. sources kind of saying that, hey, Zelensky could come to the U.S., maybe there's an agreement by Thanksgiving, to actually not so much.
Right. Well, look, this is head-snapping diplomacy. Yeah. I've really, truly never seen anything like this. You had Zelensky himself saying just yesterday, I'm ready to go talk to President Trump. I'm ready to travel. Plans were being made here in Washington and in Mar-a-Lago for any kind of interaction if they were set to go. And then President Trump posted on social media, not ready to meet with Zelensky yet. So that Thanksgiving deadline has disappeared. And we know that there is sort of just an invitation to keep moving these trains along on these parallel tracks. But I can't.
But here's where this gets really crazy. And this is the part that shows you just how deep the Republican revolt goes. Senator Roger Wicker, who's one of the biggest defense hawks in the party, came out and said this so-called peace plan has real problems and that he's highly skeptical it will work. But that's not even the most explosive part. Representative Don Bacon basically called Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, a Russian agent and demanded that Trump fire him immediately after reports leaked about secret phone calls with Putin's aides. Are you kidding me? A sitting Republican congressman is accusing Trump's top Ukraine negotiator of acting like a foreign spy and saying he should be dismissed for conducting unauthorized talks with Russian officials. This is the kind of accusation that would normally end political careers, but instead it's coming from Trump's own party members who are so disgusted by what they're seeing that they're willing to risk everything to speak out against it. The fact that Bacon is willing to make such an explosive accusation publicly shows that he believes the political cost of being associated with these pro-Russia policies is worse than the cost of defying Trump and potentially facing his political retaliation. When a Republican congressman starts asking whether a Russian agent would act any differently than Trump's own envoy, you know the situation has reached a level of crisis that threatens the entire party's national security credibility. And here's what makes this even more damaging. Mitch McConnell, who's been mostly staying quiet since losing his leadership position, came out and warned that this peace plan would be catastrophic for American interests and demanded that Trump completely overhaul his foreign policy team. When Mitch McConnell is telling you that your Ukraine strategy is a disaster and you need to fire your advisors, you know you've created a political crisis that threatens the entire Republican brand on national security. The fact that McConnell is willing to publicly break with Trump on this issue shows that even the most calculating Republican politicians think being associated with this surrender plan is more dangerous than defying the leader of their party, and that tells you everything you need to know about how politically toxic this Ukraine proposal really is. McConnell doesn't make public statements like this without carefully weighing all the political implications, so his willingness to criticize Trump's foreign policy represents a calculated decision that the electoral risks of defending Putin appeasement are worse than the risks of openly challenging Trump's judgment. This kind of rare public break from one of the most strategic minds in Republican politics signals that the Ukraine controversy has crossed lines that even the most loyal Trump supporters can't defend. The broader political implications of this revolt are absolutely staggering because they show that Trump's iron grip on the Republican Party isn't as strong as everyone thought. For months, we've been told that Republicans would go along with whatever Trump wanted because they were afraid of his political retaliation. But this Ukraine controversy proves that there are still lines that even loyal Republicans won't cross, especially when it comes to being seen as weak on national security or too cozy with Putin. The fact that senators like Wicker and McConnell are willing to publicly trash Trump's peace plan shows that they're more afraid of being associated with Putin appeasement than they are of Trump's anger. And that fear is creating the first real cracks in GOP unity that we've seen since Trump got back in office. What makes this story even more explosive is that it brings back all the Trump-Russia controversies that Republicans thought they had put behind them. When your own congressman is calling your envoy a Russian agent for having secret phone calls with Putin's aides, that's not just a policy disagreement. That's a return to the same accusations of Russian influence that dogged Trump's first presidency. And this time, instead of Democrats making these accusations, it's coming from Trump's own party members who have access to classified briefings and know exactly what kind of communications are happening between Trump's team and Russian officials. This creates a political nightmare for Trump because he can't dismiss these criticisms as partisan attacks when they're coming from Republican hawks who have generally supported his agenda. All right, so let me walk you through exactly why this Republican revolt over Trump's Ukraine surrender plan is so much more devastating than anyone realizes. Because when you dig into the actual details of what Trump proposed and how quickly it fell apart, it becomes clear that we're not just talking about a foreign policy disagreement. We're talking about a complete breakdown in Trump's ability to conduct international negotiations without causing massive political damage to his own party. And honestly, the more you understand about what was actually in this 28-point plan and why Republicans are so furious about it, the more obvious it becomes that Trump fundamentally misunderstood both what Ukraine would accept and what his own party would tolerate. The scope of what Trump was willing to concede to Russia is so staggering that it raises serious questions about his judgment and his understanding of American strategic interests, while the speed with which his own party turned against him shows that even his most loyal supporters have limits when it comes to policies that make them look like Putin apologists on the international stage. First off, let's talk about the specific details of this peace plan because they're so shocking that it's hard to believe Trump actually thought this would work. According to the leaked documents, the plan required Ukraine to permanently cede all territory in the Donbas region, including areas that Russia doesn't even fully control right now. Think about how insane that is. Trump was asking Ukraine to give up land that their soldiers are still fighting and dying to defend, including areas where Ukrainian forces are actually winning battles against Russian troops. The plan also demanded that Ukraine cap their military at a specific size that would be negotiated with Russia, which basically means letting Putin decide how many soldiers Ukraine is allowed to have to defend themselves. And then, just to make it even worse, the plan required Ukraine to formally abandon any aspirations of joining NATO or receiving security guarantees from Western allies. Come on, this isn't a peace plan. This is a complete surrender document that gives Putin everything he's wanted since the beginning of the war, while leaving Ukraine defenseless against future Russian aggression. The military cap provision is particularly outrageous because it essentially gives Russia veto power over Ukraine's defense capabilities, ensuring that even if Ukraine rebuilds after the war, they'll never be strong enough to resist future Russian pressure or invasion. This kind of arrangement would establish a precedent for letting aggressors dictate the defense capabilities of their victims, completely undermining the principle of national sovereignty that's been central to international law since World War II. But here's where the timeline becomes absolutely crucial to understanding how this disaster unfolded, and this is the part that shows you just how disconnected Trump is from political reality. He apparently set a Thanksgiving deadline for this peace deal to be finalized, which means he thought he could pressure both Ukraine and Russia into accepting his terms within a matter of weeks. The sheer arrogance of thinking you can resolve a conflict that's been going on for years with a holiday deadline shows you how little Trump understands about international diplomacy and negotiation. And when details of the plan started leaking in mid-November, the Republican reaction was so explosive that Trump's team had to scramble to revise the proposal from 28 points down to 20 points to try to make it more palatable. But even after removing some of the most controversial provisions, Putin rejected the revised plan because he wants everything Trump originally offered and isn't interested in compromising on his maximalist demands. This sequence of events reveals the fundamental problem with Trump's approach. He made massive concessions to Russia up front without securing any meaningful commitments in return, and when Putin predictably demanded even more, Trump had no leverage left to negotiate with. The holiday deadline also shows how Trump views foreign policy as a PR exercise rather than a serious diplomatic process, treating a complex international conflict like a business deal that can be wrapped up quickly if you just apply enough pressure. Now here's where Don Bacon's accusation becomes absolutely devastating, and this is the part that brings back all the worst memories of Trump-Russia controversies from his first term. Bacon didn't just criticize Trump's peace plan. He specifically called out envoy Steve Witkoff for conducting unauthorized communications with Putin's aides and asked whether a Russian agent would act any differently than Witkoff has been acting. Think about how explosive that accusation is. A sitting Republican congressman is essentially saying that Trump's top Ukraine negotiator is indistinguishable from a foreign spy in his behavior and loyalty. And the fact that Bacon is making this accusation based on leaked reports of secret phone calls between Witkoff and Russian officials suggests that there's classified information floating around that makes these communications look even worse than what's been reported publicly. When your own party members are calling your foreign policy team potential Russian assets, that's not a messaging problem. That's a credibility crisis that undermines everything you're trying to accomplish internationally. The specific language Bacon used is particularly damning because he didn't just question Witkoff's judgment or competence, he questioned his loyalty to American interests, which is about the most serious accusation you can make against a government official. The fact that a Republican congressman with access to classified briefings feels comfortable making this kind of accusation publicly suggests that there's information about these communications that hasn't been made public yet, but is alarming enough to justify this level of criticism. Roger Wicker's response is also incredibly significant because he's not some random backbencher or never Trump Republican. He's the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee and one of the most respected voices on defense issues in the entire Republican Party. When Wicker says he's highly skeptical that Trump's peace plan will achieve actual peace, that's not just political criticism. That's a professional assessment from someone who understands military strategy and international security. The fact that Wicker is willing to publicly question Trump's foreign policy competence shows that he thinks the plan is so fundamentally flawed that it's worth risking political retaliation to speak out against it. And when the ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee is trashing your peace plan, that sends a signal to allies and enemies around the world that even Trump's own party doesn't trust his judgment on military matters. Wicker's criticism carries extra weight because he's been one of the most consistent voices for strong defense spending and hawkish foreign policy positions. So when someone with his credentials says a peace plan won't work, military professionals and foreign policy experts take notice. His willingness to break with Trump publicly also suggests that he's receiving information through his committee work that makes him confident in his assessment of the plan's shortcomings. Mitch McConnell's intervention is particularly damaging because he's been mostly staying out of public fights with Trump since losing his leadership position, but this Ukraine controversy apparently crossed a line that even McConnell couldn't ignore. His warning that the peace plan would be catastrophic for American interests and his demand for a complete overhaul of Trump's foreign policy team represents a rare public break with Trump from one of the most calculating politicians in Washington. McConnell doesn't do anything without thinking through the political implications. So his willingness to criticize Trump's Ukraine strategy suggests that he thinks being associated with this surrender plan is more dangerous to Republican electoral prospects than defying Trump publicly. And that calculation tells you everything you need to know about how politically toxic this peace proposal really is. McConnell's call for a complete foreign policy team overhaul is particularly significant because it suggests he believes the problem isn't just this one plan, but the entire approach and personnel Trump has assembled for international negotiations. When someone as strategically minded as McConnell is willing to publicly call for mass firings in a Republican administration, that indicates a level of alarm about both policy substance and political damage that goes far beyond normal partisan disagreements. The fact that Putin rejected even the revised 20-point plan also reveals a lot about Trump's negotiating position and why this whole strategy was doomed from the beginning. Trump apparently thought he could pressure Putin into accepting a compromise by offering massive Ukrainian concessions. But Putin's rejection shows that he's not interested in any deal that doesn't give him everything he originally demanded. This puts Trump in an impossible position because his own party thinks he's already offered too much to Russia, but Russia won't accept anything less than total Ukrainian capitulation. The failure to understand Putin's negotiating psychology shows that Trump's team fundamentally misread both the international dynamics of this conflict and the domestic political constraints they were operating under. Putin's rejection of the watered-down plan demonstrates that he views Trump's concessions not as generous offers, but as signs of weakness that justify even greater demands. This is exactly the kind of negotiating dynamic that experienced diplomats warn against. When you start from a position of offering major concessions without securing reciprocal commitments, you signal that you're desperate for a deal and willing to pay almost any price to get it. The leaks about secret communications between Trump's envoys and Russian officials are also incredibly damaging because they bring back all the worst aspects of Trump-Russia controversies that Republicans thought they had moved past. When details emerge about unauthorized phone calls between American officials and Putin's aides, that immediately raises questions about whether these communications were properly monitored and reported to Congress. And the fact that Republican congressmen are calling these communications suspicious suggests that there's classified information about these talks that makes them look even worse than what's been reported in the media. This creates exactly the kind of scandal that Democrats love to exploit because it combines questions about Trump's loyalty with concerns about his competence in handling sensitive national security matters. The timing of this revolt is also incredibly problematic for Trump because it's happening right after other Republican electoral setbacks like the Tennessee special election and the North Carolina court losses that have GOP strategists worried about 2026. When your own senators are publicly breaking with your foreign policy while you're already dealing with political weakness, that creates a narrative of a presidency in crisis that's very difficult to overcome. And the fact that these foreign policy controversies are happening while Republicans are trying to figure out their midterm strategy means that Trump's Ukraine plan could become a major liability for GOP candidates who have to explain why they support a president whose own party thinks he's too soft on Russia. So let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because this Republican revolt over Trump's Ukraine surrender plan isn't just about foreign policy. It's about a fundamental crack in Trump's political control that could reshape the entire 2026 midterm landscape and destroy his credibility on the issue that Republicans have traditionally dominated. The implications of this revolt extend far beyond just one policy disagreement and reveal deep fractures in the GOP coalition that could have lasting consequences for Trump's ability to govern effectively and maintain party unity throughout the remainder of his presidency. Point number one, and this is absolutely critical, Trump's leaked 28-point Ukraine peace plan is so pro-Putin that his own Republican senators are calling it a Russian wish list and demanding he fire his foreign policy team. We're talking about a plan that requires Ukraine to permanently give up the Donbass region, cap their military at a size Putin approves of, and abandon any hope of joining NATO or getting Western security guarantees. Think about how insane that is. Trump is literally asking a country that was illegally invaded to give up territory, weaken their defenses, and abandon the alliance system that protects them from future aggression. Come on, this isn't a peace plan. This is a surrender document that gives Putin everything he wanted when he started this war. And the fact that Trump set a Thanksgiving deadline to get this done shows you how completely disconnected he is from the reality of international diplomacy. Yeah, like you can just resolve a years-long war because you want it done by a holiday. The Republican reaction has been so explosive that Roger Wicker, one of the biggest defense hawks in the Senate, said he's highly skeptical the plan will work, while Don Bacon straight up called Trump's envoy a Russian agent and demanded he be fired. When your own party members are accusing your foreign policy team of acting like foreign spies, you've created a political crisis that threatens everything you're trying to accomplish. The fact that Trump had to revise the plan from 28 points down to 20 points shows how quickly he realized he had miscalculated the political reaction. But even the watered-down version was still so pro-Russian that Putin rejected it because he wants everything Trump originally offered. Point number 2, and this is where the political disaster becomes impossible to ignore. This revolt is bringing back all the Trump-Russia controversies that Republicans thought they had put behind them, except this time the accusations are coming from Trump's own party members instead of Democrats. Don Bacon didn't just criticize the peace plan, he specifically called out envoy Steve Witkoff for having secret phone calls with Putin's aides, and asked whether a Russian agent would act any differently. Think about how devastating that accusation is when it's coming from a Republican congressman who has access to classified briefings and knows exactly what kind of communications are happening between Trump's team and Russian officials. And Mitch McConnell's warning that the plan would be catastrophic for American interests represents a rare public break from one of the most calculating politicians in Washington, which tells you that even McConnell thinks being associated with this surrender plan is more dangerous than defying Trump publicly. This creates a political nightmare for Trump because he can't dismiss these criticisms as partisan attacks when they're coming from Republican hawks who have generally supported his agenda. And it gives Democrats perfect ammunition to argue that Trump is so compromised by Russia that even his own party can't defend his foreign policy decisions. The fact that this is happening while Republicans are already dealing with electoral setbacks in places like Tennessee shows that Trump's Ukraine strategy could become a major liability for GOP candidates who have to explain why they support a president whose own senators think he's too soft on Putin. The return of Trump-Russia controversies at this moment in his presidency is particularly damaging because it undermines one of the key arguments Republicans have been making about why Trump deserves a second chance, that he learned from his first-term mistakes and would govern more effectively this time around. Point number 3, and this is where Trump's negotiating incompetence becomes undeniable, the peace plan fell apart so quickly that Trump had to revise it from 28 points down to 20 points to try to calm Republican outrage, but Putin rejected even the watered-down version because he wants everything Trump originally offered. This shows you how completely Trump misunderstood both what his own party would tolerate and what Putin would accept. He apparently thought he could pressure Putin into a compromise by offering massive Ukrainian concessions, but Putin's rejection shows that Russia isn't interested in any deal that doesn't give them total victory. So now Trump is stuck in this impossible position where his own party thinks he's already given away too much to Russia, but Russia won't accept anything less than complete Ukrainian capitulation. This is what happens when you try to negotiate from a position of weakness and desperation. You end up satisfying nobody and looking incompetent to everyone involved. And the fact that details of these negotiations keep leaking suggests that someone inside the administration or the intelligence community is deliberately trying to undermine Trump's Ukraine strategy by exposing his communications with Russian officials. When your own government is leaking against your foreign policy, that's not just a political problem. That's a sign that your administration is fundamentally dysfunctional and can't maintain the kind of discipline necessary for effective diplomacy. The rapid sequence of proposal, revision, and rejection makes Trump look like an amateur who doesn't understand how international negotiations work or what leverage he actually has in the situation. And point number 4, and this is the most important long-term issue, this revolt exposes the first major crack in Trump's control over the Republican Party and could be the beginning of a much broader pattern of GOP senators prioritizing their own political survival over loyalty to Trump. The fact that establishment figures like Wicker and McConnell are willing to publicly break with Trump on foreign policy shows that there are still issues that can drive Republican senators to defy their party leader, especially when they think his positions are politically toxic or substantively dangerous. This isn't just about Ukraine. This is about whether Trump can maintain the kind of party discipline that's essential for advancing a controversial agenda through Congress. And if Republican senators are willing to break with Trump on foreign policy, that creates a precedent for breaking with him on other issues where they think his positions hurt their electoral prospects. This could be the beginning of a dynamic where Trump spends more time fighting members of his own party than fighting Democrats, especially as we get closer to the 2026 midterms when Republican senators start worrying more about their own races than about Trump's agenda. The Ukraine revolt shows that Trump's iron grip on the GOP isn't as strong as everyone thought, and that weakness could cascade into other policy areas if Republicans decide that loyalty to Trump is less important than their own political survival. The willingness of multiple Republican leaders to risk Trump's anger over this issue suggests that they believe being associated with Putin appeasement is more dangerous to their political futures than defying the party leader, which represents a fundamental shift in how they calculate political risks and benefits. Now here's what comes next. And this is where it gets really important for everyone watching. This Republican revolt is just the beginning. We're going to see sustained pressure from GOP senators for Trump to completely overhaul his foreign policy team and abandon his surrender strategy for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Democrats are going to use this controversy to argue that Trump is so compromised by Russia that even his own party can't trust his foreign policy decisions. We're also likely to see more leaks about Trump's communications with Russian officials as people inside the government try to expose what they see as dangerous appeasement of Putin. The choice for Republicans is becoming crystal clear. Either they continue to enable Trump's pro-Russia foreign policy and risk being seen as Putin apologists in 2026, or they break with him publicly and start the process of taking back control of their party's national security credentials. This Ukraine revolt shows that some Republicans have already made that choice. The countdown to a complete breakdown in GOP unity on foreign policy has officially begun,